What's going on, beautiful people? Just wanted to welcome y'all to week 1 of community permaculture and introduce the videos we'll be checking out this week, give y'all a quick overview. If you don't have time to watch one video, I would say check out the last one on the list, Thriving in the Broken Landscape. It's a beautiful meditation using the metaphor of a wildflower that can help us think through some of these broader ideas and to some extent overcome ecological despair, which is a very natural response to feeling overwhelmed and wanting to do something and not quite knowing how to do it. So if you had time for a second video, I would say check out the 7-minute 12 principles of permaculture, which additionally gives us concepts to think through rather than a quick, magic bullet sort of solution. I think dealing in principles and thinking through, because a solution that's helpful in one context could be harmful in another. Having principles to think through the specifics of situations, general principles to help us think through the specifics of any particular problem, I think is really important. So both of those are excellent. If you just watch the two of those, it'll be less than 25 minutes. I think a great investment in your knowledge base and in our collective effort to raise awareness about our ecological situation and what we can do. So I'm going to now run through the 9 videos that we have laid out for you to check out this week and give you a quick, not a spark notes, but a quick just why are these on the list, and maybe here are a couple things that you should pay attention to in them. So we begin with we begin today on Martin Luther King Day with the video "Climate Change is a Social Justice Issue" by Adriana. Says it all in the title, right? Beautifully put, simple and effective message that is conveyed through a personal history, a personal story of how climate change impacted her and her context, which I think is really important for us to move with empathy, to move into a space where we understand climate change is going to impact people in their lives, and we could be those people. And I think in that context, action takes on a whole nother level, takes a whole nother meaning. So really any of us could be in the predicament that she describes, and I want us to remember that as we move forward. I also think what she does is help us ground an understanding of ecology in a social context, and because we're humans who have dominated the ecosystem and changed it, we live in the Anthropocene, as they call it. When we talk about one, ecology, we're always talking about the other, sociology, or vice versa, right? When we look at these permaculture videos and we learn about this term, we notice a lot of these permaculturalists are white landowners, European descent, basically white farmers, right? And European monoculture farming is what caused the problem. Many of us descendants of the Europeans are part of the solution, I'm sure, but it's really important that we not just be limited to that perspective. So she really emphasizes, one, that those who cause climate change are not those who are going to primarily suffer from it, and that therefore economics and race, migration, displacement, all of these need to be part of our ecological discussion if we are going to deal with the reality that we have created here. So as we move through the course, she gives us some grounding in thinking about how do we focus on paying attention to indigenous voices and organizations, right? These are the people often most impacted by Eurocentric land theft and poor land management, and they often are repositories, cultural repositories of the best models of sustainability that are known to man or to humanity. So thankfully, we still have some access to those cultures and those knowledge bases, and she reminds us that putting that to the forefront is going to be a really important task for us to focus on. So I would love for your help. If you hear of or know of voices that we need to bring to the forefront in this conversation, in this course, please send them to me, and I will help to fill out our conversation with more than what I have right now, right? What I have right now is great. Let's keep exploring that, but I need help expanding it. The second video by Zach Weiss, Hope in a World of Crisis, Water Cycle Restoration. This is an excellent overview of the water cycle as really the driver of biology on the earth. And I think the most impactful thing that jumps out on the broad level from this video for me is the idea that I've heard reiterated elsewhere, including by Farmer Rishi, who's a local Los Angeles activist and farmer, that humans aren't just the force of inevitable force of ecocide with their inevitably horrible presence and their consumption. And, you know, we're not a plague on the earth, essentially. That's something that we in many senses have become, but we can also be the drivers and the stewards of the earth and the most powerful force for ecological regeneration, right? If we're working with nature and we're helping steward the land, which we have essentially, you know, or are currently with our practices of land management destroying. So focusing on preventative medicine, as he puts it, as we destroy the organs of the earth, rather than symptom management, is really important. And he brings to the forefront an idea that we're going to talk a lot about, which is focusing on carbon is really important, right? We hear all this talk about, you know, climate change. We got to draw down carbon. And that's great. But only 4 to 11%, as he says, of the global heat dynamics are regulated by carbon. 75 to 95% of our heat dynamics are regulated by the water cycle. So if we are to do anything about climate change, we need to focus in the largest portion of our attention on water cycle literacy and water cycle management and regeneration. So there's a lot in here on hydrology and everything. It's actually not that technical, but it is a quick overview of a lot of important stuff. So I wanted to just go through a couple important ideas. He talks about our natural water cycle being a biotic pump, and that means biological systems facilitate the movement of water from the oceans through the continents. And this being the case, we have a stable water cycle. Water's more available year-round. It sinks in the ground for use by plants instead of just flooding, you know, or causing erosion. And having soils facilitate or allow that biotic pump to operate makes a sponge, which supports vegetation and supports the stability of life on Earth. He mentions a couple terms that we're going to talk about a lot: transpiration and hygroscopic, Hygro, hygroscopic microorganisms. Basically, trees help create rain, right? Indigenous cultures knew this and discussed it in certain terms. Westerners often, you know, dismiss them as animists, crazy, you know, talking about how trees are calling the rain. What are you talking about? They literally do. So we've got a lot of science demonstrating that, and understanding that is going to underlie or allow us to move in a way that's actually stewarding the earth. So we have disturbed this whole biotic pump process. We've desertified about 1/3 of the earth's arable land through agriculture, through monocultural practices, which use, you know, tilling, and therefore stopping that and rehydrating the earth and restabilizing the water cycle is really the thing that we can do as earth stewards. And it's pretty simple. It's not, you know, we don't need giant patentable machines or geoengineering schemes to do this. We need to plant trees and learn how to keep the earth green and keep the ground covered with green plants. So it sounds really simple, and he describes it in a very elegant way, and I would highly recommend you checking out that video as well. The next 3 videos, the soil story from Kiss the Ground, Soil Carbon Sponge, and Stop Talking About Carbon Emissions and Focus on Restoring the Water Cycle. Very short videos that just give you a quick overview of something I'd like to help us connect. So connecting the discourse on carbon, instead of just dismissing, you know, carbon's not really important, it's water we need to focus on. It is more important that we focus on the water cycle, but carbon is part of that water cycle. So understanding the complexity of things, I think the soil story one helps us to see how carbon and soil are related. And as does the next one, the soil carbon sponge. It gives us some more specifics on how plants sequester carbon to feed soil life. It reminds us as well about the importance of fungi and microorganisms that are fed by those plant carbohydrates, sugars, essentially. But then the one that's stop talking about carbon emissions and focus on restoring the water cycle, I think really clinches this super important point. If we want to return equilibrium to the earth, we have to, as I just finished describing a lot, regreen the land, right? The other thing that he adds to the discussion that I think is really important is that our industrial food system, being the driver of the problem, creating these, what he calls externalities, aka hidden costs that we don't account for, means that fixing our food system and fixing our climatological imbalance need to be mutually accomplished. So he discusses that or raises that briefly at the end of that video, and then he also briefly reminds us, he just hints at the role of trees in harvesting water, which we talked about hygroscopy and sending up little rain seeding microorganisms. He also talks about condensation a little bit at the end of that, and how tree condensation is providing like 80% of the water in a certain climate in California. So yeah, a couple of things that we're going to be dealing with a lot more, how trees help us all live. All right. Next video, the 12 principles of permaculture design, 7-minute quick video that has a lot of info packed into it. Again, if we want to actually restore, our water cycle and lean in towards climate justice, not thinking simplistically, but instead using principles to guide us, proven principles derived from observing natural systems, is definitely the best way to go. And I think these principles, while not, being exhaustive, and we've got to learn from everywhere we can, they're a pretty good guide to how nature keeps systems sustainable, and if we use them and apply them, how we can be agents of regeneration rather than agents of destruction. All right, the next two videos are essentially how-tos and or inspiration for you to then maybe take some of those principles and do something with them. So the first one, how to turn your yard into a garden. Rob Greenfield, really cool guy, interesting activist, done some really funny stuff like wearing all the trash that he created in a bodysuit, living for a whole year just off stuff he could grow, forage, or trade for, I think. So he's doing some really interesting stuff. He just runs us through a quick 10-12 minute, basically how to turn a lawn into a garden. And I think that's really important. A lawn, is a tiny thin layer of green, whereas a forest is a giant, stacking of carbon and green. And remember, if plants are so high, their root systems are also, as deep or more deep oftentimes. And all of that is creating and capturing carbon and stimulating the water cycle. So lawns, while fine if you don't have to water them or spray anything, spray any pesticides or fertilizer, are not a great investment in terms of, if we want to get off our industrial food system, beginning to supply our own food while capturing more carbon, while repairing the water cycle, seems like a great thing to do. And even if you don't have if you don't have access to a yard or a lawn, you might know people who do. You might, find some way to apply that knowledge. So check it out if you're interested. Even if you're like, I'm in a small apartment, I don't really have access to land, check out the Small Space Apartment Balcony Edible Garden, which I put in there for inspiration for you. It's a gorgeous little garden that looks like it's producing massive amounts of food in a very small area. And the more interaction that we can have with plants, the more stewardship and curation of plants that we can begin to practice. And it really is practice, right? I hear the only difference between a master gardener and a beginner gardener is that the master gardener has killed more plants. We need to remember that as we inevitably kill some plants in our growth process. Looking at what she did there, I think hopefully can inspire you to maybe attempt something similar, or just begin the journey if you can see what's possible, So those are essentially the how-tos, and then as I said, we close with a meditation, or what I'd like to think of as a broad stepping back and thinking through this metaphor of the wildflower and how to be like the wildflower and how to learn from nature. It's a great example, I think, of someone learning from nature and sharing through that lens. And what does the wildflower do? It's relatively small, it's humble, but it expresses this beautiful, unique individuality that is crucial for the entire ecosystem of the forest to function and to function well. So he's describing, right, what is this? Thriving in the broken landscape. What is the broken landscape? He's saying our sociological, ecological, political, economic landscapes are damaged. They're disturbed. They're in need of repair. This world that we come into has a scarcity of food and water, of shelter that's totally unnecessary. It's been actively cultivated because the profit motive benefits from that status quo. That's essentially the way to create an abstract, theft-based sort of economy that doesn't serve human needs, or it only serves the needs of a few. And he says what we actually have a scarcity of is really, ecological literacy. He talks about California, a scarcity of watershed literacy, appreciation of our ecology, and we have a scarcity of accountability for those who destroy it. We don't really, we externalize again those costs. We kick the can down the road, and grandkids will deal with it or whatever. I'm living large in a yacht right now, but good luck grandkids type thing. So what do we feel when we come into that sort of situation? We might, totally not be blamed for feeling despair, for feeling futility, for, just, yeah. What are we going to do if that's the case? That's the sort of world we live in. He, I think, paints a really beautiful, he takes us through, you could try nonprofit activism, and that's really important. He describes his journey essentially recognizing that he couldn't pay rent and do that, right? Because our society doesn't value the sort of regenerative, restorative work enough. We really have to think differently, or he offers us rather an opportunity. He says there's many niches, there's many trophic levels we can participate in our economy, but he is an example of someone who said, well, I'm going to do a regenerative business, so I'm going to be able to pay my rent and heal the earth at the same time, which I think is really admirable and something that, I'd like to emulate, and I hope other people begin to emulate. As part of that, we think, okay, where's our energy going? Where's our finance, our time, our choices? And when we think about our energy in a kind of broader ecological way, and we decide that we are important enough to continue to thrive and live, as the landscape is currently laid out economically, that might mean participating in the capitalist system. And he's found a way to do that. That checks a bunch of boxes in terms of service at the same time. So his company's called Earth Steward Ecology. Really great company. Full disclosure, I actually have worked with them and have seen his principles in action. And I think he's a really admirable thinker on the topic of permaculture, who is local. He's from Long Beach, and he's doing his work in SoCal here. So a lot for us to learn from him. He closes with a discussion that I love of how our social solidarity, the interconnection of success and struggle around the world in this global ecosystem that we all share, can be understood through that humble analogy of the wildflower again, and uses that punny coinage of SOILdarity to emphasize this common origin and end that we all have in the earth, right? From ashes to ashes, dust to dust. He calls it soil as womb and grave. And he posits that even in our disturbed soil, even in the disturbed environment, ecologically and economically speaking, that we might come from, we can learn to thrive. We can learn to thrive in diversity. We actually need that. A good forest isn't just made up of one type of tree or plant. He says, essentially, a wildflower isn't made to sit there and hide behind a rock. It's made to express itself. That's what feeds the pollinators that come to fertilize it and let it continue its life and reproduce, right? So to take that ethos of the wildflower and move it, and this is what I really love about this talk, in the direction of healing or updating, as he puts it, the epigenetics of our world of ideas. so that we can begin to thrive, not just literally in the old growth forests or as we regenerate old growth forests, but also the analogy there is to sustainable human cultures, right, that have the mighty oak tree of the matriarch or the patriarch, and the young saplings coming up underneath it, right? So to think about our society as a forest, and to think about ourselves as wildflowers, I think can add something to our discourse and to our self-understanding, that is not necessarily reducible to a quick SparkNotes thing. It's something, as I said, to meditate with. So particularly love that talk. Hope you get to spend some time with it and think through it a little bit. And that's pretty much it. So I've got some extra resources I've included as well for you to check out if you're interested, including some actual kind of data, you can look through. Here's the UN figures on desertification, soil erosion atlas, if you want to actually start to map stuff out, as well as a food desert atlas, so we can start to connect our social desertification with our ecological desertification. And speaking of food deserts, I've included in here a great article. It's called "The Struggle Against Food Insecurity in Long Beach," I believe, Urban Hunger. That if you're interested in Long Beach and its food deserts and want to pay attention to that, it would be great, something great to pay attention to. I will maybe even include another conceptual video or two for you to start exploring. But that's basically it. I might include as well some people you can follow on Instagram. But let's keep it, that's plenty, I'm sure, for now. So hope y'all enjoy the videos this week. Thanks for checking in. Please send me any questions, suggestions, ideas. Would love to keep the dialogue going. So thank y'all for participating. Much love.